Good evening, everybody. It's 7 o'clock on a Thursday evening. I'm Anna Hall and I'm the Director of Operations at RDA. Welcome very much to this evening's webinar where the focus will be on first aid. We have two fantastic people who will be speaking to you today. So we've got Corey and we've got Marissa, and they'll be introducing themselves in a minute. For those people who haven't joined a webinar before, we'll run through this session. Corey will be doing a presentation and there'll be a few questions throughout, but you will have the opportunity to ask questions as we go, but we'll do a Q&A session at the end. If you want to ask any questions, you should be able to go to the bottom of your screen and you'll see a little bubble that says Q&A, and you can just type in there any questions and we'll put those to the panel this evening. I also wanted to mention that next week is the start of our Road to Restart initiative, and we've got a couple of webinars coming up for you. The theme next week is Trustee Confidence, and we actually have two webinars. The first one is on Monday, the 1st of March at 1 p.m, and the focus of that will be leading groups out of lockdown and what trustees need to know. The one next week at 7 p.m. is trustees in conference with each other, and so you'll learn from their experience about what they've done to get groups back started out of lockdown. Without any further ado, I'd like to hand over now to Marissa, who will introduce herself and start this evening's session.
Thank you, Anna. I'm Marissa Bretherton-Mackay, Group Support and Business Operations Manager at RDA UK. My team, amongst other areas, look after health and safety and first aid. And we all know that first aid and safety underpins everything we do in RDA. Now, over the past few months, as you can imagine, we've been getting quite a few inquiries about what lockdown, minimal staff on site, or shorter interaction with participants will actually mean in terms of first aid provision. We're getting inquiries about whether you need how to access training, whether you can access renewals during this time, or what kind of first aid provision you need with the limited manpower that you've got on site. Now, this webinar couldn't have come at a better time, as you can imagine, because with the positive news that groups are getting ready to restart, we've had a lot of excited emails this week, haven't we, Anna? Groups starting to already make plans. So with having an expert online tonight is brilliant for us, because we're hoping that tonight's session will help groups address quite a few of their queries and give them the chance to plan with a little bit more confidence and start to put the plans into place to move into action over the next couple of weeks or so. We keep all of the information regarding health and safety and first aid on the MyRDA website, www.myrda.org.uk. And if you visit the health and safety page, we do work to keep all of the first aid information there as up to date as we can. Now, we're delighted to have online tonight, thank you so much for joining us, Corey Jones, Director of Mitigation and First Aid Training Cooperative. Some of you may know Corey already, because I know in recent years you've delivered a number of excellent training sessions to regions and groups throughout the UK. But I'd like to hand over to him now to have a chance to introduce himself, explain a little bit about how tonight's programme is going to go, and hopefully later on he's going to do a short presentation, but he'll be able to address some of the personal questions that you've got and some of the more specific areas of concern. So hand over to you now, Corey. Thank you.
Great, that's lovely, Marissa. Thank you very much for that. So I'm really pleased to be here this evening to talk to you all. My name is Corey Jones. I'm one of the directors of the First Aid Training Cooperative, and Mitigation has joined the cooperative to be one of our partner organisations, so we're really pleased that that's happened. I'm going to give you a chat, maybe 6 or 7 PowerPoint slides. We don't want to overwhelm people, but just to explain the current situation with first aid training and what the future is over the next few months for people who are just returning back. That's the plan. Please ask questions as we go along. We'll try and answer them as best we can at the end. I'm not promising I'll have all the answers, but I'll do my best, my honest best, to answer your questions as we're going through. So if we could have the first slide up, Marissa, that would be great. That's lovely. So this is just the welcome slide. So yeah, we're talking about equestrian first aid, not equine first aid this evening. So just to make that clear at the start. And the reason I put the picture on this slide is obviously mid-March last year, we stopped running first aid courses as COVID became prevalent. First aid courses are usually face-to-face, they're quite interactive, they're quite tactile, and so we stopped running courses last March. But as the initial pandemic wound down and the case rates dropped, we started running courses again face-to-face in September. So this picture is from a course that we actually ran as an organisation in September last year. It was at RDA UK headquarters, so some of you might recognise the venue. And you can actually see some of the COVID mitigation that we had in place. We had a group of 12 people in the indoor arena, so really easy to socially distance everyone, a couple of metres apart, lots of fresh air in the venue. Everyone was temperature checked as they came in to make sure that they weren't have a high temperature. And when we ran the scenarios, you can see that the trainer at the front, I think you can make out the trainer at the front that was wearing a face mask. And all the individuals wear face masks when we're doing the practical work, like putting the recovery position and constantly sort of sanitising hands as we're going through the course. That's part of the COVID mitigation that we've got running on the courses. And then when it came through to November, December, obviously with the new strain of COVID that came along in December, we stopped running courses again. And we haven't really been running very many courses face-to-face since December. And I'll talk more about that and how we're going to get back into first aid training as we move through into the spring and summer. So that's part of my talk this evening. So Marisha, if you don't mind clicking through to the next slide.
Oh. Sorry, just having a technical difficulty at the moment, sorry. Sorry, just give me one moment. I'm just going to. Apologies for this.
Oh, that's great.
Sorry.
So that's lovely. So I think a lot of people
seems to frozen. I do apologise.
That slide's great. I'll chat to that and then we can try and move on from there. A lot of people phone up our office and ask, what first aid course do I need? How do I know how many first aiders I need on site? What first aid kits do I need? So we'll try and run through some of that very quickly as part of the chat just now. And that one of the challenges I think with deciding what first aid provision you need is the health and safety executive, which governs what training is required, often uses quite opaque words like this is guidance and it's not recommendations. And so sometimes when you look at things, they don't seem very black and white. And so every establishment needs to make its own decisions in a way about what's best for them. You can see that as a positive thing, but you can also see that as a negative thing. It's positive in that you can make choices depending on your individual context, whether you're a big setting or a small setting, how many staff you've got. But actually, some people find that very difficult and they just like things in black and white. We need this, this, and this, and that will make life simple for them. But the HSC, being a big organisation, likes to use words like guidance as opposed to recommendations. So that's one of the challenges we've got. First aid provision should be for settings. But I guess your legal duties are to look after your staff, visitors, volunteers, and the public. All of the first aid guidance is set out in a document called L74. And if you just Google HSC L74, that will pop up and you'll be able to see that and download it and read it all for yourself. I guess my job tonight is to try and decipher some of that for you. But what the health and safety executive says, every establishment, so every stable, every livery needs to do is to carry out a first aid needs assessment. And essentially that's a first aid risk assessment for your site. And if you think about general risk assessments, it's about identifying hazards, deciding who might be harmed, and deciding what's the risk of that harm happening. And it's very similar for first aid. We need to look around the site. We need to think what could happen. So in equestrian settings, we're thinking bites, kicks. The horse is probably the most dangerous thing that we're managing, and so that's part of the risk assessment for first aid. Sorry, I don't know, Marisha, your technical term, but what customers you have coming on site, what are the needs of your visitors and how many visitors are there, and that's part of the needs assessment as well. If you want to just click on to the next slide, if you can, Marissa, that would be great.
I can do. I'm sorry about this. Can I just ask a really quick question as well, please, Corey? Because I know in past people have asked this before. With first aid, I know they call it first aid needs assessment, as you said, and it's actually a risk assessment. Do you need to do that on a specific separate risk assessment form? So would you need to prepare that as a separate document, or is it okay where provision allows to include it on your main risk assessment?
You can absolutely put it on your main risk assessment,
Okay.
and just join the two documents together. If anything ever happened and the HSE came and did an inspection, they'd want to see that you'd done some form of first aid risk assessment, whether that's on a separate document or a combined document. They're not really bothered about. They just need to see that you've actually thought about it beforehand. So this slide is answering questions people often ask us on the phone when they're calling, is what kind of first aid training do I need? Because there are various first aid courses out there. And what the health and safety executive would say is that the employer needs to decide whether they are in a high risk workplace or a low risk workplace. Now, what the health and safety executive is thinking as in terms of low risk workplace, shops, places where you get trips, slips, falls, that's a low risk work environment. And classically, the HSE would think of a high risk work environment as a construction site where you've got machinery and plant. And if there is an accident, it's going to have a big consequence. And that's often described as a high risk work environment. And so in your setting, I guess you need to think about what accidents might happen and whether they're high risk or low risk. And it's not necessarily up for me to say that, but if you're doing lots of jumping and jump practice, well, I guess that makes it higher risk. If you're taking people out and doing hacking, well, actually that becomes more high risk. Whereas you're just staying in the indoor arena, you're just doing guiding people around the arena, that's quite low risk. So I think each establishment needs to decide for itself whether it's a high risk or a low risk setting. If you have lots of machinery on site that's running around, that obviously makes it more high risk. So you just need to think about that. If you're a low risk work environment, the HSE recommends you do a one-day emergency first aid at work course. And once you've done that one-day course, it will keep your first aid certificate. You'll be valid for 3 years. Then after 3 years, you need to renew that certificate. If you work in a high risk workplace, the HSE recommends you do a 3-day first aid at work course. And 10 years ago, that used to be a 4-day course. For those people that remember that, they've shortened it a little bit. But again, that needs a refresher every 3 years. But for that longer course, if you do your refresher within the 3 years, it only needs to be a 2-day refresher, not the whole course again. And the HSE also recommends that you do an annual refresher for your first aid course. So within those 3 years, you do a short refresher course. And what a lot of people do now is they do a sort of online refresher every year. And we've got one on our website that you can just sort of log in and I guess purchase that online session. You get a little certificate at the end of it. It's all done online. But there's actually quite a lot of equine organisations now that do sort of online refreshers as well. So I'm not going to mention other organisations, but you can find them online, sort of 1 hour refresher courses, which would cover that need. Anyone who's a coach, level 2 coach or above, if you think about your governing body requirements, then virtually all of the governing bodies for the coaches above level 2 require that those people have a valid first aid at work qualification. I guess that's the caveat, which is what you're based upon your coaches. That's lovely, Marissa. If we bump to the next slide.
Yeah, can I just clarify as well, Corey, because I know a couple of people have asked me about this as well, that a refresher course is purely that, isn't it? You'd need to have attended the first aid course in person before, but it doesn't constitute training on its own.
Yeah, if you just do that online course, it doesn't count as the full qualification. And so your certificate must say either emergency first aid at work or first aid at work. And on that certificate, it will say the hours for that course, and that's part of the HSE. So for us as an organisation, when we're issuing certificates, the HSE asks us to put certain information on it. And one of those things is about the syllabus for the course and actually the length of the course, because the length is actually a major requirement from the HSE's point of view. So that's how you know that you've done the right course, because it will actually, the certificate should say emergency first aid at work, brackets 6 hours, or first aid at work, brackets 18 hours. It should say that on the certificate.
That's great, thank you.
So this is a question we commonly get asked. So I'm assuming that this is a question that everyone sort of tries to figure out, is how many staff do I need to be trained? And this comes back to your first aid needs assessment. If you're a small establishment, you've only got a few animals, you've got a one indoor arena, everything's quite compact, it's all in one place. Actually, one first aider for that site might be enough. But if you're a large setting, you've got an indoor arena, you've got an outdoor arena, you've got people who are working in both areas at once. Maybe you'll have a separate office building, which might be actually at the main farm, maybe 200 meters away from where the arenas are. Well, one first aider probably doesn't cut it. You probably need to have 2 or 3 first aiders, and that should come from your first aid needs assessment. But what we'd always say to people is, if you've got one first aider on site, what happens when they take a holiday? Who is your first aider? So even if you're a small setting, you might need to have more than one trained person. And so I think these are things that you need to be thinking about. And so we can give advice, but what the HSE says, it's up to the employer to make the decision about how many first aiders they need. On their website and in that L74 document I mentioned earlier on, they have got more guidance, but it essentially boils down to what we've sort of talked about on the last couple of slides. Certainly, if you have people driving for work and working off-site, then that individual needs a first aid certificate, unless they're going to a site where they can work under the auspices of someone else who's got a first aid certificate on that site. And you don't always know that, so actually having that person trained up is probably a useful thing. So that's just something to think about. And I think another question we get asked a lot is, why is it always 12 people that go on a first aid course? You know, if someone phones us up and asks to book a course, we'll say that you can have up to 12 people on the course, even if it's a small setting and there's only 6 or 7 people. And that's because the HSE set a limit for first aid training, which is 1 trainer to 12 people. So if you're a small setting, you've got 5 people, and one of our trainers is coming out to work with you at your setting, then we'll always say to you, well, bring another stable in, bring another livery in, bring their staff in, and actually that you get 12 seats filled. You're still paying 1 price for all of those people, and then you can share the cost between 2 or even 3 centres for smaller centres. But all providers will say you can bring up to 12 people on a course, because that's the HSE limit for trainer to student ratios. That's how that crops up. If you flip on to the next one, Marissa, that'd be lovely. Another common question, how many first aid kits do I need? And again, if you're a small setting, you probably get away with 1 first aid kit in the tack room or somewhere pretty centrally. If you're a larger setting, maybe you'll need 1 in the indoor arena, 1 in the outdoor arena, maybe 1 in the tack room, 1 in the office. And again, if you are driving for work, every vehicle needs to have a first aid kit in it. And that includes driving your own vehicle. So if you've got individuals who are using their personal vehicle and driving to somewhere else for work, they must have a first aid kit in that vehicle. So that's one of the HSE requirements. The other thing to do is to make sure somebody checks that first aid kit from time to time. We've all been in places where you open the first aid kit because someone's had an injury, cut their finger, and you can see straight away that those bandages are 20 years old and no one's looked in the box for ages. So make sure somebody regularly checks it. And when we say regularly, probably if you're a busy site, maybe every 3 months. If you're a very quiet site, maybe every 6 months would be enough. It doesn't have to be on a weekly basis, but a reasonable enough time to make sure that first aid kit is stocked up. And in these days of COVID, make sure you put some face masks in those first aid kits now. So that's an addition that you might want to think about putting in the first aid kits. The HSE has a standard requirement for first aid kits, what should go in a first aid kit, how many bandages, etc. And that can be found on the HSE's website. Or at the end of the chat, we're going to talk about a downloadable manual, and actually what should go in a first aid kit is actually in that free resource we're going to talk about later on, so you can get that from there. The HSE will also say if you have specific work practices at your venue, then you need to make an allowance for that. So if, for example, you're working in a commercial kitchen, one of the things they'll have in their first aid kits is often things like burn dressings. They might have blue plasters rather than standard plasters, because the plasters fall into the food. They're very easy to track if they're blue. And often those blue plasters have a little bit of metal in them. So actually you can metal detect and find them in food and pull them out. So in settings which have got specific work practices, you might have extra bits of first aid kit. And who knows your settings best? Well, you do. So you know what goes wrong. So you should have appropriate kit in your first aid for what you think is going to happen at your site. That's great. If we flip on to the next picture. So one of the questions where I get asked on a daily basis at the moment, as everyone's thinking of coming out of lockdown, is, can I do a first aid course now? And the answer is yes, you can. If you have a business critical need for a first aid course, we as an organisation are allowed to run first aid courses. Are we running very many courses at the moment? No, we're not. And that's partly because most people don't want to do a face-to-face course at the moment, which is reasonable, absolutely reasonable. And actually, most of our trainers don't want to be running courses at the moment either. So we have a duty to look after our staff. So it sort of cuts both ways in that sense. And so what the HSE has done is it has extended first aid certificates essentially until March the 31st this year. So lockdown came into place last March. If people's first aid certificates were running out in April, May, June last year, the HSE says, actually, you should only have a 6-month extension to those. But actually, what everyone has taken, and what the HSE sort of come up with now is, because of COVID, no one could get on a first aid course, then they've just extended everyone's certificates essentially till March the 31st this year, which begs the question, if your certificates run out, what happens after March the 31st? Because most of us are still in lockdown. It hasn't unwound enough for us to have lots of courses. So as I say, it is possible to have a first aid course, a face-to-face course right now, but not many people are going for that. So what else can you do? We've looked at the second bullet on the slide. What the HSE says is you need to be working towards your first aid qualification. So actually you could book a course for April or May so that you're working towards that updated qualification certificate. And in the meantime, just do an online refresher, and that would cover you until you get that training. So a lot of people are going for that option at the moment, booking courses with us in late April, early May, June, because they know by then, you know, a lot of people will have had their jabs. COVID, because of the summer, should be dropping case numbers anyway, and people would feel much more happy about having face-to-face courses then. So that's another alternative, is to book a course after March the 31st, but in the meantime, do something to show to the HSE you're keeping your training up to speed, which would be one of these online refreshers. Over lockdown, we have developed blended learning courses. So this is something we've not done before, it's new for us. And a blended learning course is a cross-media course. So essentially it is a little bit of self-paced online learning. So you go online, you do 3 hours of training online. We then do a live webinar with one of our trainers. So a trainer will have 2 hours with a group and talking through first aid scenarios, chatting to the group, answering their questions. And then there still has to be an element of assessment on the course, and that has to be done face-to-face, which is a HSE requirement. So essentially everyone comes to a central venue for an hour, and individuals just come into a room with the trainer and just get assessed, doing a little bit of CPR practice and a couple of other things, demonstrating recovery position. And so that way you only have to have 1 hour's face-to-face contact time, but you get a whole course. That's for the 1-day emergency first aid at work course. It's a little bit more for the full first aid at work course, but we can do both of those as blended learning options now. Another question we get asked a lot is, I've only got 3 people to train from my stable, my livery, and actually I don't want to buy in a group of 12, it's too expensive for me. And maybe there's not another setting close by to get a big course together. So what we're doing for the first time this year is we're running some open or public equestrian specific first aid courses. We're doing those nationally. I think, Marissa, you've got those up on your website for people to book onto. So if you've just got yourself or maybe 2 or 3 people you want to do a course, you don't want to buy in a full course because it's too expensive for you, you can just go to another venue and do a course by booking on it online with us. There might be an option for some settings to host a course, because we're looking for venues to run open courses from. So something else to think about. And what we've done for settings is we said, well, actually, if you give us a setting for a day, give us the indoor arena where our trainer can run a course in a really well socially distanced way, we'll give you a couple of free places on that course. So that's an option if some people think of that, and Marissa can put you in touch with me and we can chat about that separately. Yeah, so how do you keep your first aid certificate up to date right now? Well, if it's business critical, you can do a course right now or the next week or 2, but most people are saying not to do that. Or book a course after March the 31st as you think it's safe for your staff, your group, and in the meantime do some refresher training, or book a blended learning course, or come on a public course. There's a few options there for people. So I think for people concerned about getting back up to speed and being quotes unquote legal for first aid training, there's a few options for you. If we just flip on, Marissa, that'd be great.
Thank you.
In terms of COVID mitigation on training courses, again, this is a course that I ran. That's a picture of me in the background there, assessing for danger before I walk into the accident scene in the picture there. So what do we do on courses in terms of COVID mitigation? Well, when we're working together, we're just working in pairs. The same two people work together all day. If those two people are from the same setting, actually, they work with each other all day, every day. So that's quite low risk. Everyone's temperature checked as they come in the room. Everyone's wearing face masks when we do the practicals. There's lots of hand sanitizing going on between the practicals. And actually, Marissa's done one of our courses, so she can sort of reinforce that a little bit as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the other thing, I guess, that this picture shows quite nicely is that we do the training in your equipment. So in terms of people will ask us, well, how do I deal with a casualty wearing a body protector? How do I deal with a casualty wearing an air vest? Should I leave the helmet on? Should I take the helmet off? These are all things that we'll cover on the course, because you can bring your own kit and we can show you how to leave it on if it doesn't need to be removed, if you need to remove it, how you'd remove it. So this is all built into our equestrian first aid training. So I guess that's my only bit of marketing, Marissa. Sorry about that. That's my bit of marketing. So if we just come on to the next picture. Right. So this is hot off the press, brand new news. We have literally just finished writing our new equestrian first aid manual, and this is going to be a digital manual. So essentially, you can download it, put it on your phone, and you have a first aid manual on your phone, or you can download it to your tablet at home and flick through it on your tablet. It has lots of information on it. It actually has links to YouTube videos that we've done. You know, if you forget how to do CPR, what's the CPR for children and babies as opposed to adults? How do I deal with a choking person? Well, actually, you can just go to the choking page in the manual, click on the video link, and watch a video just to refresh yourself. So this is hot off the press. I think, Marissa, you've seen a draft version already. We're going to launch it in a couple of weeks. And what we'd like to do for RDA members and groups is to offer you this resource for free, so you can download it for free and have it. And I think, Marissa, you're going to do some once we go live in 2 or 3 weeks, send people a link so they can download it from our website if people want to do that. So I think that's something we can do for you for free, which will hopefully help your members. The other thing you can do right now is just go to our website. We've got lots of blogs specifically aimed at equestrian first aid. So there's things like top 10 tips for hypothermia for horse riders, top 10 tips for rope burn for horse riders, top 10 tips for what happens at a road traffic accident for horse riders. I mean, there's lots and lots of blogs on there. We've got over 200 blogs on our website, but there's about 30 of them which are specifically for horse riders and equestrians. So it's definitely worth having a look at the website afterwards to have a look at some of those blogs. If anyone's got any feedback for us, that'd be really good as well. We'd love to have comments or have you thought about this? Maybe the information's not quite right. Maybe you need to just tweak it a little bit. And we're really happy to receive feedback like that as well. That's really useful for us. We're just coming to the end of my chat now. So we'll just go to the last slide is next. And this is just my contact details. So if anybody wants to drop me an email, that's my Corrie at First Aid Training Cooperative email. If anyone wants to have a look at the website, the web link's there. And the phone numbers there are office phone numbers. So if anyone wants to phone the office to find out more information, they can put you through to me. Or if anybody's thinking about the dates of the public courses, anything like that, they can just look at the website, phone the office, or Marissa, I think you've got all of those dates anyway, but people will find that information out. So I hope people have found that chat informative. I'm really happy to answer questions if I didn't explain things thoroughly enough for yourselves. I appreciate some things are a little bit grey, and that is the first aid sector. It is a little bit murky from time to time, but we'll try and do our best to decipher it and answer questions people have got.
Thank you so much, Corrie. That was really brilliant and informative. I have got quite a few questions that have come through during the presentation. Marissa, do you want to just come off that screen so we can see Corrie's face a bit broader? That's brilliant. So I've got a whole load of questions. My first one, and we'll try and hopefully deal with them quite quickly because we're quite short of time. We try and keep these to about half an hour. So are there any differences in rules for Scotland is my first question.
Not for first aid training. And I'm actually based in Scotland, so I'm in the Highlands. I'm based in Gaelach. The only difference is, I guess, at the moment with lockdown, we're going at lockdown at a different pace to the rest of the UK. But actually in Scotland, you can have a first aid course tomorrow if it is business critical. So in that sense, it is all the same. And the HSE works UK wide. So the rules are UK wide from the HSE.
Brilliant, thank you very much. I've got a couple of questions, and obviously there are other providers are available, but what is the cost for the online refresher?
So the online refresher, I think, is £30. So if you go online, but I can mention there are other equestrian organisations out there that give you a free online refresher. Am I allowed to mention names? I don't know what the protocol is for that. But I know BGA and Equestrian Employer Association, they've got a free online refresher. We wrote it, but so if you wanted to do a free refresher, you could just go on their website and use that. If you go to, again, sorry, it's a bit commercial, but Equitools, I don't know if people have heard of Equitools or use that one. There's a free online first aid refresher there. Again, I would highlight that they are not a replacement for a full course. The HSC would not see those as a replacement for a full course, but actually in the current climate, if you wanted to do a refresher, there's a couple of free places that you can get the free refresher training. Or yes, come to us and pay us a bit of money, that would be lovely.
Brilliant. And then I've got a question about the courses, where are they held and do you do groups? So I think the answer to that is on the MyRDA site. We've got all of those listed that people can join. The group size, if you want to book one, is 12, isn't it? So
they're on the event, the pre-scheduled ones, sorry to interrupt, are on the events page of MyRDA, listed in chronological order, so it should be quite easy to find them.
Thank you. I've also got a question. Oh, sorry, Corey.
No, I was just saying, already I know that we work with a lot of RDA groups who are in rural areas, but smaller groups, but often 2 or 3 will join together to get a course between them. And so we'll just go to one of the settings, and everyone just comes to that for the day. And if local people know each other and can organise that, it makes it much more cost effective for them.
You mentioned about, was it either a level or an L2 coach? What do you class as that?
So so that's a really good question. So in your sector, some of your BHS coaches or your dressage coaches or your show jumping coaches have got their coaching qualification. And if that is a level 2 qualification, and they should know that, then they need a full first aid at work course. Okay,
so that is the level 2 that is UKCC. So that is the equivalent of the stage 3 coaching complete horsemanship in the BHS, and also equivalent to our coach as well. So in effect, that means an independent coach in the equestrian sector. Thank you for that. So I've got a few questions which I think I'll skip over. So would disposable gloves be good to have in the kit?
Essential. And in fact, HSE, even before COVID, in my first aid training career, which is now 18 years long, we've always had gloves in our first aid kit. These days, non-latex gloves, so vinyl or nitrile gloves is great, but not latex gloves, because some people have a latex allergy. And I would recommend you put 3 or 4 pairs in there, because what tends to happen is somebody goes into the kit, they pull out a pair of gloves and a plaster, put plaster on, and then the next person goes into the first aid kit and there's nothing there for them. So shove a few pairs of gloves in there at the top, so that when people open the box, there's gloves available. And now shove a couple of those blue paper masks in there, the sort of PPE masks, because actually if you're dealing with a casualty now and you're getting close to people, put your gloves on and put a mask on. You might even put a mask on the casualty, so have a couple of masks in that first aid kit from now on. And that's something we're talking to people about on courses as well.
Brilliant. And we've got a question here. Will you be able to do mouth-to-mouth on training days after the 31st of March?
Really good question. Interestingly, we have been doing mouth-to-mouth on first aid courses right now. So one of our courses last week. So we've run a couple because it's business critical for that organisation. We have been doing mouth-to-mouth on courses because on the mannequins, we can take the plastic face off the mannequin. And on the courses we run, probably Marissa, you had the thing, we actually gave out 12 masks. Everyone got their own mask. And so everyone had a quote unquote clean face on their mannequins. There was no chance of any COVID cross-contamination that way. So we're a different provider to some in that when our trainers come to your venue, they don't bring one CPR mannequin and 12 people don't practice on the same mannequin. We've never done that. We always bring a minimum of 6 mannequins on courses, so there's a maximum of 2 people sharing a mannequin. And actually now we give everyone their own face, so there's even less chance of any cross-contamination. And the advantage of that for us actually as a training organisation is if you bring lots of mannequins, people get loads of practice time. If you bring one mannequin, you've got 12 people doing it, you only get 2 or 3 minutes on the mannequin, and yet you do a lot of sitting around, scratching your head, watching other people. We just bring lots of mannequins and everyone just gets stuck in and does lots of practice. Sorry,
I can vouch for how well organised that was. It was brilliant, actually. It worked really well, and we did appreciate the extra practice. Thank you.
So I've got a question here. Does RDA have a first aid needs assessment template?
That's a good question. What I can do is I will have one on file somewhere that I can send to you, Marissa, and you could probably take my logo off and put your logo on. That would probably work reasonably well, I suspect.
That would be helpful.
If you drop me an email tomorrow, Marissa, I'll get that organised for you.
I'll do that. Thanks. And just for everyone else, if they want to include it in their main risk assessment template, particularly for the COVID protocols, get in touch with me at groupsupport@rda.org.uk, and I'll be happy to give you some advice on how to complete that section within a master document rather than a standalone. So we've got both options available to you.
So I've got a comment saying St John's Ambulance currently saying no mouth to mouth, just chest compressions, but obviously there's slightly different views there. I've got a few questions here about RDA policy, so I think there may be a few things that we might need to follow up on by making sure that it's on the My RDA First Aid Health and Safety page. So currently only invite our coaches to do a 1-day course, not a 3-day. Could you just clarify the requirements there?
Well, my understanding is it's a level 2 coach. I mean, it was great you had all that sector-specific speak. So our understanding is that level 2 coaches need to have a first aid at work qualification. I guess within your RDA guidance, you must be able to know what your coaches need, whether they need 1 day or 3 day.
So at the moment, we're recommending 1 day. Is that right, Marissa?
I think that our coaches have done 1 day, but again, I'll follow that up with a training and education team actually, because I think it's probably risk environment and sort of coach role specific as well. So we'll double check what that means and we'll report back. We'll put some information about that on the first aid section on the health and safety page, just to clarify that.
And then a question from Kim, can National Office add the first aid refresher training onto the e-learning package? Well, I guess there's absolutely no reason why we couldn't or shouldn't. And given that Corey's obviously done quite a bit of work with the equestrian employers and BGA, we might be able to twist his arm. So thank you very much for that, Kim. I'm just scrolling through the questions now. So there's a mention here of the 3-hour annual refresher. Is that something that we require?
So again, this is where it gets a little bit grey. So the HSC would recommend that you do it, but it doesn't say you must do it. So most people don't do it, if I was honest. And I think pre-COVID, most people would assume that 3-hour refresher would have had to be a face-to-face refresher, whereas now, because of COVID, actually everyone's doing that refresher as an online refresher, so they're much easier to do. And that may mean that there's more take-up of refresher courses, particularly some people have free ones now. So I would say it's a useful thing to do every year, because if we have good learning and we don't refresh that learning, we have skills fade and we forget things. So having that refresher every year is a really good thing. Particularly if it's online, it's relatively easy to do, doesn't really cost very much. Then that's a positive, I think. It's not like you're having to buy in a training provider to come to your venue and organise everyone to be there at the same time. It can be done relatively simply now. So I would certainly recommend it, but nobody says you have to do it.
I think as best practice, we could probably do something, couldn't we, to raise awareness a little bit more of that and make it more accessible if groups wanted to do that, to let them know that's what the process is. I think we could probably do better with that, so we'll look into it.
I think I've got the final question now, and I'm aware we're sort of 10 minutes over, so apologies. So we're starting to lose people a little bit. So you talked about the requirement to have a first aid kit in the car if someone's working. We obviously have quite a lot of volunteers that will be going up and down the country to do things like coach reviews or going to visit RDA groups. Do those individuals travelling in their private car and going to a venue that obviously would have a first aid kit in place need to have one during their travel?
So I guess those volunteers, when they're driving to do a piece of work somewhere else, are actually the equivalent of staff members at that point. You know, they're going to do some work for you even as a volunteer. So my answer would be yes, they do. But actually having a first aid kit in your car anyway is not a bad idea.
Yeah, and some cars come with them, to be honest, as well,
Yeah.
which is really helpful. So I think that's all I've got in terms of questions. I'm just scrolling down the list of Q&A. I'm just actually going to double check the chat to see if we've had anything else come through there, because sometimes we have a little bit. I think that is absolutely everything. And Corrie, thank you so much today. You've given us so much information, and we'll make sure that we update all the information on the My RDA page as well. And thank you so much for the really useful questions. It's been really, really good this evening. And hopefully you're looking forward to next week, where we'll be starting the Road to Restart with a bumper webinar on Monday at 1 o'clock, and then Thursday evening at 7 o'clock in the evening. So hopefully see you then. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.